I work with a lot of highly technical research scientists who are just at the moment of deciding if they want to be a founder. And so I like to push them on this kind of logic question, which is help me identify for you and your business, what are the things that are necessary and what are the things that are sufficient and what things are both necessary and sufficient for you to make it to the next step. And the reason I frame it that way is because I talk with founders and they say, oh, I'm doing, these 100 different things. And I just ask them that simple question. Is this both necessary and sufficient for you to get to next week with success? And it usually comes down to like one or two things, and all of the rest of it is noise.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Ken Horenstein as our guest. Ken is the founding partner at the Pack Ventures, a Seattle venture firm that is focused on supporting startups and technology that's coming out of the University of Washington. If you're someone interested in new technology and innovative AI startups that are spinning out of the UW, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to have Ken on the podcast today. Can't wait to learn more. Let's get to it. All right, Ken, welcome to the Shift AI podcast. I am really, really excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Boaz. I think I've been wanting to do this since you guys first came out with the podcast, so the honor is all mine.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today, but first, I just want to set the context for your background. I think a lot of people know you in the Seattle ecosystem, but a lot of our audience doesn't. So I'm going to go back to the Microsoft days where you spent time, and then you were part of a really interesting group, but the Microsoft's venture fund, M12, and did a lot of interesting work there. From there, you moved to being the co-founder of Venture Out, and we're going to get to like more detail about Venture Out, but you and Sean Sternbach were part of Venture Out. And it was really an interesting company tied into the ecosystem around Microsoft and Amazon and people that were coming out of those organizations and others that were trying to get into the startup ecosystem. And then you're a mentor at CoMotion, and now you're the founder and general partner at Pack Ventures. Now, I know that way back when you had a career in finance as well, but did I get close to getting all of that right?
Yeah, you hit all the big points, especially the recent career being pretty much focused on venture capital, angel investing, startups for almost 10 years now.
Yeah. God,
yeah.
Man, a decade. That's amazing.
I know. Crazy.
Well, when you think about like going way back, just so that we can establish some of your personal background, you're from the state of Washington?
Yeah. I grew up down in Vancouver, Washington, which is kind of a mini Switzerland in the US. There's no income tax in Vancouver, but Portland is about a 5-minute drive away. And so no sales tax when you cross the border.
Yeah, that's the other Vancouver.
Yeah,
Isn't
exactly.
That right? Yeah. and so what was the first, like in a town that size, kind of what was the first job where you actually got paid? What was your family business conversations like? Were they into entrepreneurship? Is that how you got the bug to want to be in the startup world?
Yeah, it really did start with my family. So most of the generation before my generation, my family are attorneys. And almost every single one of them, I think all of them, started their own law practices. So from as young as I can remember, I remember a Hornstein law firm in some edition or another. And it was really that kind of foundation where I saw my parents, my uncles, my aunts all create their own law firms, where I realized, wow, this is kind of cool. You control your own destiny. You get to really hire people, mentor them, train them. And honestly, if we go to my first job, the first thing I kind of got paid for, we lived next to I don't want it to sound glamorous because it's not at all, but we lived next to a very small old golf course. And these golfers would shank their balls into our yard. And so I would go out once a week and I would collect as many golf balls as I could. Granted, I'm in like first grade at this point. And I would just go to the end of my driveway, set up a table with just a couple buckets of balls, and started selling golf balls back to people that would mishit them towards our house. Yeah, most kids, that are entrepreneurial have a lemonade stand, but I just kind of took took the lemons in front of me that were the golf balls.
That's great. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. So before we get into Pack Ventures, I want you to talk to the audience a bit about M12 too, and that experience at Microsoft. Can you touch on those two jobs that you had?
Yeah. So Microsoft was a company I never thought I would work for. I've lived in Seattle for a long time. I first moved here in 2006, had a lot of friends who went to work under the Ballmer years. And it just didn't really feel like the type of company I wanted to be a part of. But when I was in business school was when Satya took over. And I was just here at the University of Washington, and they did a lot of awesome work to connect us with folks at Microsoft. I did a project for some Microsoft leaders. And I really kind of latched on to Satya's really growth mindset kind of orientation for the company. And that drove me to actually just say, you know what, I'll apply. I'll talk with a couple people. We'll see if I like it. And just immediately was blown away by the brilliance that works there. And really what felt like a cultural shift where people wanted to explore more. They wanted to test more. They wanted to do things differently than Microsoft had in the past. And so when I got there, I spent about a year in marketing and operations, which for me was awesome to kind of build my chops as a go-to-market leader, kind of COO type. But very quickly, I discovered this team. It wasn't even called M12 at the time. It was called Microsoft Ventures. It was a brand new org within Microsoft and something that Microsoft really had not done before, which is kind of an unknown fact about M12. And so Peggy Johnson, who is the head of business development, had recruited Nagraj Kashyap, who had built Qualcomm Ventures, to come over and build a true venture fund inside of Microsoft. So Microsoft had experimented, and this is really credit to Satya, because this was completely supported by Satya and Amy Hood, the CFO. They said, we're going to take every year roughly, $100 to $150 million at the time. And we're going to go out and we're going to invest in startups just like any other venture capital firm would. And there's a spectrum when it comes to corporate venture. On one side, you have something a little bit more akin to like a Salesforce venture, which is here's an investment, build on the Salesforce ecosystem and marketplace because we are trying to build out our partnerships. Very, very strategically aligned. They were trying to fill oftentimes a hole in their product offerings, in their partnership offerings. And then on the far other side would be a Google Ventures or a Sapphire Ventures. Sapphire Ventures is the VC arm of SAP, but SAP is a LP, like any other venture fund, into an independent organization. And so M12 was really modeled off of GV or Sapphire Ventures. Reason that's important is because it meant we were not taking our direction from product leaders. We wouldn't get a CVP saying, hey, we don't have this feature. Can you go find this for us in the market and invest? We would maybe even invest counter to Microsoft's strategy. So our goal was we have to find the best technologies. We have to pair with the best investors in the world, the Andreessen, Sequoias, Mayfields, Kleiners, all of those folks. And potentially find an area where Microsoft is just completely missing or doing it wrong. And the only way that's successful is if you have someone like Satya backing you up and saying, hey, product leaders, CVPs, it's okay for M12. Not only is it okay, but M12 is going to bring you insights and learnings that you couldn't get otherwise. So I joined that team. I think I was around employee 12, about a year before we rebranded to M12. And I came in kind of as a jack of all trades. And so I did a little bit of everything there. It was, due diligence, fund accounting and reporting, strategic insight gathering, portfolio development. So once Microsoft invests in them, how do we partner with those startups and help them be successful at Microsoft? All the way to the point where I built out what we called market development. And so that was, how do we connect our founders to Fortune 500 CXOs to help them accelerate their revenue, right? Help them get that big contract that could completely change the trajectory of their company. And the cool side benefit of that was I got to work with these CXOs almost as like an innovation partner, talking about our strategy, how we set up M12, how they could do this in their firms. And so I got this chance to talk to a bunch of the biggest corporations in the world about their venture capital ambitions.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We'll talk about PAC in a second, but what a great learning opportunity for you at that time. But before we get into PAC Ventures, let's talk a little bit about Venture Out, because I want people to understand, given the situation we have right now in Seattle with Techstars going away, with Foundations, Aviel's new entity kind of coming up, and what we're doing at AI2 Incubator, and all the things that are kind of going on, Venture Out was really an interesting play that you and Sean tried to do. Can you just describe that and talk about what the mission was?
Yeah, our mission at Venture Out was, how do we enable really talented engineers to go full time on their side hustles? So what we found was there were hundreds of either former founders or engineers working at Amazon, Microsoft, Google here in Seattle. But I've talked about this a lot. They had these golden handcuffs, right? They were very well incentivized at these companies. And maybe they had an earnout because they had previously sold their company to one of these big firms. But they were ready to go and make that leap back into entrepreneurship. And the way that you do that, in my opinion, the best ecosystems in the world, if we look at Silicon Valley, now even New York, is to have a free flow of talent, not just from big company to startup, but it could also be startup to startup, big company to big company. And what happens there is this Cambrian explosion of ideas, companies, talent, and mentorship. And so Venture Out really started. I was not an original co-founder from day zero. That was actually Aviel, Sean, and a guy named Pablo Brown Rodriguez. And they brought me and about 10, 12 other people into a room over some like pizza, charcuterie, and beer and wine, and just said, what do you all need to go full time on your startup? How can we help you? And the overwhelming response was, just keep doing these. Just give me a place where I can talk to people about my ideas. I can get their feedback. I can ask them for help in areas that I know nothing about. Maybe it's pricing, maybe it's online advertising, maybe it's backend infrastructure, doesn't necessarily matter. And just keep bringing this group together. And so for about a year, we kept hosting these meetups every month. And they eventually evolved, but they got to a point where Sean and I were spending even more time with all of these entrepreneurs, and they were asking us for more advice, maybe some angel investment into their companies. And so we decided to go full time on the company. M12, Flying Fish, Liquid 2 Ventures, and Founders Co-op all invested in us, as well as about 30 angels. And the idea was, how can we build a kind of nights and weekends accelerator so these people can keep their day jobs, but validate their startup before they break those golden handcuffs?
Yeah, what a great idea. And I know that the pandemic got in the way, but kind of what it highlights for me is getting people together in the same room, especially really smart people like that, is such a powerful thing. And when you look at the Bay Area and you look at New York and you look at Austin, you look at some of these other places, there's power to getting people together. And I think some of that may have been lost in Zoom world.
Totally. You know, the special sauce initially of Venture Out, and it's not like it's proprietary by any means. And I think this was originally Sean's idea, was let's make these really high value connections, right? We've all been to plenty of, let's quote unquote, networking sessions where you're just going and having a beer and talking with folks. But Sean really wanted to take that to another level. And so the structure that he came up with was he would, before the event, reach out to people and ask them for questions they had for the group. And we would often have 3 to 8 people say, I'm working on this problem inside my company right now. I would love to talk to another founder about it. And so we would come in, everyone would do like a 15-second intro. And these would usually be 30 to 50 people in the room. And then those people who had questions would stand up and they would ask their questions. They got about 2 minutes, I believe. And then from there, once all the questions have been asked, people would self-select into the groups where they thought they had unique experiences and ability to help. And we'd break out for 20 to 30 minutes. Then we'd switch groups. And the founders would come away at the end of this saying, I know exactly how to solve this problem. I know exactly the next steps. And I heard it from other founders. I didn't hear it from a service provider. I didn't hear it from, an old timer VC who isn't in the weeds anymore. And you're right, that got broken during COVID. It was really hard to do with Zoom. And we started to lose a little bit of the momentum behind that kind of model.
Yeah, such a great concept though, an idea. And I know I go to a lot of networking events too. And sometimes you don't get the flywheel going until the very end. So it's nice to kind of instigate that. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about now. I mean, so you know that I'm a UW grad, and so I love what happens coming out of the UW. But the University of Washington globally is such a amazing institution. It's graduating so many awesome engineers, and globally people know about all the research that happens there, both on healthcare and life sciences and technology. So right now you are working within the University of Washington to seed and support ideas and founders that are coming out of the UW. So let's set the stage for us. Help the audience understand what you're doing.
Yeah. So one thing I'll clarify is I'm deeply partnered with UW, but I'm also fully independent. I'm not a state employee. I don't work for the university. I rent space on campus. And then I'm a mentor, advisor, sponsor of pretty much every single startup program or club on campus.
Amazing.
But the kernel of PAC, just to give you a little bit of the background story, it actually came from a working group that was convened by President Kause, the president of the university, and the time Provost Mark Richards. And this working group was really focused on, we have one of the best research institutions on the planet, full stop. And I'll give you some numbers on that in a minute. But for some reason, we're lacking something when it comes to translating all of that research into funded companies. And so Matt McElwain from Madrona and Chris DeVore from Founders Co-op, another big sponsor named Mike Halperin, and a few others came together. And they essentially wrote this 50,000-foot white paper about why UW needed an affiliated venture fund. And it turns out there's 2 of these at Cal. There's 3 of them at MIT. I stopped counting at Stanford after 4. And there's at least 2 or 3 of them at Harvard. Michigan has them. Almost every research institution has one of these. And UW didn't. And so Mike and Matt and Chris kind of seeded this idea in my brain and then recruited me to come build it. And so I did my normal analysis. Is there venture opportunity here? Why would I do this? The first data point I point to is UW gets over $1.2 billion every year from the NIH. Last I looked, that's second only to Harvard. From 2008 to 2018, we commercialized or licensed more intellectual property than Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon combined. Every year, we have at least 250 invention disclosures. Not a direct correlation to spinouts, but it just shows the amount of research, prowess that's happening. But then the last time these numbers were ran, it was in 2021. If you looked at founders getting $1 million in funding or more, Stanford had about 465 in 2021, and UW had 70. Now, I'm not saying we should be Stanford, but all of our research peers, when it comes to computer science, bioengineering, the material sciences, all of them are well north of 150 and somewhere between like 150 and 300. And so for me, what I saw was we've got a wealth of resources. We have some of the best talent in the world, but we don't have this kind of translation layer from those labs to funded founders and funded startups that maybe a Madrona, a Fuse, a Coast, these bigger firms would want to see. And so that was the promise of PAC, was come out, be an independent voice on campus, and really support that next generation of entrepreneurs with that initial capital that they need.
That makes sense. So talk about some of the founders and some of the portfolio companies that you're the most excited about that you've been funding lately.
Yeah, so we're just raising and deploying from our second fund already. So we've got almost 30 companies that we've backed between Fund 1 and Fund 2. We really follow the areas where UW is world-class in research. So we're top 10 computer science department. Last I looked, top 6 AI department. We have one of the best bioengineering organizations on the planet, predominantly because of one lab called the Institute for Protein Design, which is headed by David Baker. In my opinion, it's a matter of when David will win a Nobel Prize and not if. And then we're really strong in robotics and material sciences and aeronautics. So our fund really focuses kind of in that software, life sciences, deep tech. Let me highlight a couple, and I'm going to get in trouble for choosing any of my children. So they're all great. I love them all. But considering this is an AI podcast, I figured I'd focus on a couple of the really cool AI companies.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one we did at the pre-seed level, a couple engineers who came out of Microsoft is called Supio, and they are building document automation for the legal industry. So how this worked in the past, and all my family is attorneys, so I could do some really good customer diligence on this, is a law firm, even a small law firm, will create hundreds or thousands of templates for their filings, their legal filings. Yeah. And they will take in a case, they will see that something needs to be filed, they will then go to that category of templates, and they will just kind of Frankenstein a template together to say, okay, here is the filing that we need to make. That is a perfect problem for generative models, right? Train it on our own internal legal documents. Now you can have either an attorney or even, a low-level attorney or paralegal just in natural language query what they need to build. And you've just saved them dozens, if not hundreds of hours of time. They've exploded. They're taking off really well. Bonfire VC invested after us. Breakwater Ventures invested with us, and they're kind of taking off. And I see this legal space being one of the most applicable areas for generative AI because the law is essentially code. And so it just works really well to provide efficiencies.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing.
Yeah. You guys are doing a lot of work, I feel like, with firms in this space as well. Yeah. So the two others I'll highlight on the life sciences side. One is called Archon. This is a spin out from the Institute for Protein Design. And these guys are using cutting edge. Most of your listeners probably know all of the generative models on the software side, right? OpenAI, Mistral, Llama, etc. On the life sciences side, there's really two that lead the pack. The first one is called AlphaFold, and it was developed by DeepMind at Google. And the second one is called RosettaFold, and it was developed by David Baker and his team at UW. And what these do is amino acids are a string of amino acids will build a protein, right? And when you look at these on paper, they just look like language, random language, but they're just letters. And so what RosettaFold is able to do is it's able to generate what we call de novo proteins. So these are proteins that would not exist in the natural world. But because we know the design and shape of them with RosettaFold, we can start to build net new proteins, which means we can also program them. So if you think about building a new drugs made of proteins are called biologics, and you wanted to attach, everyone now knows a spike protein because of COVID, you wanted to attach to a very specific spike protein, there may not have been a naturally occurring protein that would have attached to that spike protein previously. We can build that. And so Archon is a platform that's building new types of drugs around Rosetta. The other one that's in a similar space is called Accipiter. And so,
okay.
Yeah, it's a type of hawk. And so what these guys have built is there's a industry called monoclonal antibodies that most people have probably taken some type of monoclonal antibody at some point if they've had cancer or other types of kind of debilitating disease. And if we go back to kind of the COVID example, your disease has a receptor, And so what you want to do is you want to attach a drug to that receptor. Well, monoclonal, meaning one, means we found one attachment point and one way to hook on to that disease. And now we can deliver the drug. What the research and science is showing now is that a lot of disease states are dual clonal, right? You need to attach to two different parts of the disease so that you can effectively deliver the drug. The next cutting edge is N-clonal, multi-specific. Certain types of diseases, you will have to attach to the disease in multiple ways to be able to eventually deliver your drug or turn off the disease in some way. And so Exponential has developed an AI platform that helps them generate these multimodal antibody drug conjugates, et cetera, so that we can now go tackle the thousands of other diseases that these monoclonals can't work on.
That's incredible.
It's super cool.
It's really, you know what I think is interesting, and I think a lot of listeners have just been exposed to ChatGPT and other forms of chatbots, and they think about AI in that way. But what's amazing about Gen AI is its ability to understand language in a very specific way. And what you guys are doing is using that and leveraging that for lots of different other things that are separate from just, writing tools and Gen AI and other kinds of, content related tools. And I just think that's really powerful. It's going to affect us in massive ways. It's going to affect our health in massive ways.
Huge. So we've been investing quite heavily in what I would call the two sides of this kind of life sciences problem. And it's a direct correlation on the software side. On the software side, we understand the language and we understand the structure of the data, which then enables us to build software to manipulate that data and language into something new and creative, right? And so for us, we look at it as what companies are we investing in that are gathering more of the language of biology and helping us understand and translate the language of biology? And then how can we invest in companies that are using that language to build better responses or drugs to that particular ailment or malady that's in your body? And so they're very correlated. And the best teams that we see are oftentimes some world-class PhD biologist and then a world-class PhD artificial intelligence engineer. And they're coming together and bringing both sides of that coin so that they can effectively translate what needs to actually happen.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, that's very, very, very cool. Hey, so I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to touch on some of the mentoring that you do at Commotion and across the UW, but also on people that have mentored you. So it's a two-part question. So the first part is, you do a lot of this mentoring. What are you seeing out there for the founders out there that are listening?
Yeah.
That is some advice that could really help them move the needle on the business. And then I want you to follow up with people in your life that have mentored you that were really impactful.
I'm going to caveat this with one thing. So I have a finance degree, but I studied just as much during undergrad in philosophy.
Okay.
And I tell people that philosophy taught me how to think, and investing in finance is what I wanted to think about. And so I approach my mentoring in that kind of similar vein. And one of my favorite questions that I ask, especially I work with a lot of highly technical research scientists who are just at the moment of deciding if they want to be a founder, right? Mm-hmm. And so I like to push them on this kind of logic question, which is, help me identify for you and your business, what are the things that are necessary and what are the things that are sufficient, and what things are both necessary and sufficient for you to make it to the next step. And the reason I frame it that way is because I talk with founders and they say, oh, I'm doing, these 100 different things. And I just ask them that simple question: is this both necessary and sufficient for you to get to next week with success? And it usually comes down to like one or two things, and all of the rest of it is noise.
Yeah. That's a great framework.
Yeah.
Because all of us are looking for the rocks that we know we need to put in the bucket, not the pebbles. And so I just love that.
I take it to heart in my own life. I build a to-do list every day, and then I go through the to-do list and I'm like, which one here is actually both necessary and sufficient? Versus there's always things we got to do to move things forward. And, you got to fill out the paperwork. You got to do the legal documents. You got to do the follow-up email, of course. But there's probably one thing in your day that you can do that will actually transform your opportunity.
Yeah. Great advice.
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of mental models. I read everything I can, whether it's Bezos, Charlie Munger, Elon Musk, Ben Franklin. I love when people distill down their thinking process, and I'm always trying to make mine better. And so the mentors that I've had so many, it's like it would be impossible for me to list them all. And maybe I call them mentors and they wouldn't call themselves mentors, but whether they know it or not. But the mentors that I have that similar kind of first principles thinking, and they're really good question askers. Like one thing I always advise undergraduates and graduate students on, hey, what can I do to increase my career faster? It's become a better question asker. Because the better the question you ask, the better the data you get back and the faster the learning. And so I've been fortunate, I interned with Porch.com back just after the Series A, and I got the chance to work directly with Matthew Nagel and Asha Sharma, who's now a VP at Microsoft. She's also, I think we're the same age, so it's really intimidating to me, like to see her success. But my direct boss was a guy named Kyle Sandberg. And okay. Kyle is now at Amazon and is a leader at Amazon on the payments team. And we can go walking for 3 hours and never get bored of the conversation.
Yeah.
We don't come in with anything pre-planned, right? It's not like we're sharing notes. Here's the agenda. We just keep asking questions of each other. And he's an engineer by training. So he always goes to first principles and says, okay, what are we trying to get at here? What's the point? And so he's been a big influence on me. And I interned with them in 2016. And I still meet up with Kyle at least once a quarter.
That's so great. It's so important to have those people in our lives. And I just feel like post-pandemic, some of that has been lost. And so I'm glad that people are getting back together, and, that folks that are more experienced are mentoring people. I'm really encouraged by that. And I think that young people are hungry for it. So it's really great to hear you say that. All right. So last question for you. And we usually end the show with this question in 2 words. As you think about all the amazing stuff that you got your hands in and what you see into the future, 2 words to describe the future of work, AI, future of society, and then you can elaborate.
I think the 2 words that I would use, actually, I guess I'll put it this way. I think it is exponential value. Now, I don't mean that in the traditional capitalist financial way. That's only one way that I mean it, right? Companies now, in my opinion, need somewhere between a quarter and a third the capital resources they needed 18 months ago to build the same company. A quarter to a third. That is insane, right? If a round had to be $1.5 million before, the company can get to similar levels of progress on $500,000. That is unlocked value. Now that million can go to 2 more companies, and who knows what they're going to do, right? But the other thing, I'm a techno-optimist. So I think this idea that, hey, AI is going to destroy all of these jobs, it's going to destroy life as we know it. I actually hope that it frees me up and all of us up to live a fuller life. I cannot wait to have a perfect AI tutor in my pocket. So when I want to go learn something, I can learn it in a matter of days instead of weeks, months, or years. I cannot wait to have a perfect AI assistant to do a lot of that necessary work that I hate doing. Filling out a CRM, writing a follow-up email just to confirm something. Those things enable us to go back to exponential value in our life. And so that's what I'm kind of most excited for, is my kids are going to grow up in a completely different experience with work, life, people, technology that I think will be much more valuable than any of us have experienced to date. And we've had it pretty good. I mean, this thing changed our lives. And I think this is a fraction of what artificial intelligence is going to be able to do for the next generations.
Yeah, I share your optimism. And I'm looking forward to the day where I'm still busy, but I'm doing things every day that are higher impact. And I'm really, really excited about the things that are going to come out of the University of Washington and PAC and what you're doing. It's really life changing. And I think a lot of people are going to feel that, especially on the life sciences side. And I think, you and I have talked about this offline, but I'm excited about getting some of these portfolio companies on the show talking about this deep tech, both on the health science side and on the software side. So Ken, thank you so much for joining us. Very excited for what you're doing. And looking forward to more conversations. Thanks for being on the Shift AI podcast.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate you.
Thank you. That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Ken as our guest on today's episode. Ken brings a unique perspective into how fast-growing AI companies across a variety of sectors spinning out of one of the major computer science higher education institutions in the world. If you want to stay connected to Ken, you can find him on LinkedIn and X. If you are interested in how he thinks about the startup ecosystem, definitely connect with him and keep up with his posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to the episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews and to the Augmented AI weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.